Yeah, okay. It's a pity that Yonggang is not here, but I think it's thanks to the leadership of Raimond and Yonggang that we have really made some progress in this wonderful Sino-European project. So I would like to focus a little bit more on this Schumpeterian dimension of resource efficiency and sustainability. So let's see what the outline is. So at first I would give you a short introduction, then look at, I think, what is important as a theoretical basis of this green Schumpeterian sustainability analysis. I can say a few words about the Community Innovation Survey, and I would very much encourage our Chinese colleagues that they should consider to adopt a similar survey, maybe not for all sectors, but at least for some of the important sectors, and the green sector, ICT, automotive, and others, I think, are very important. Then I will focus a little bit on policy aspects and future research. So when we look at the circular economy, innovation, and sustainability, I think it's very interesting to look at this report from Switzerland. And I will not look into the individual dimensions here, but I would like to emphasize as one element in our research in past years that we were also looking into the EIW Vita Sustainability Indicator, which has this focus on green international competitiveness and green innovativeness. If you think there is a lead function, of course, of R&D, or you could say a relative international lead in a certain green technology field, and with a lag of 3 or 4 years, then you typically have a green RCA advantage. So this is the Schumpeterian perspective. And I would like to maybe suggest some old and new views on the links between product innovation, process innovation, and the product cycle, which then lends itself also to look into product cycle trade aspects. We will not have time for this here, but I think this is very important. Okay, so when we talk about an international perspective here, I would say we are basically talking about the tradable sector, the dynamics of the tradable sector, of course also in terms of the underlying technology. We understand from the paper of Mathieu Glachon that recycling will reduce international trade in raw materials. This is one aspect. But there's also this question about product innovation and process innovations, and then at a more macro perspective, the green revealed comparative advantage of countries. I should like to look back here at a theoretical approach by Otterbeck and Abernathy. So they were basically arguing that in an innovation cycle perspective, so looking at a product, the product innovations first. So when you have a new green technology field, okay, it all starts with a wave of product innovations that will decline over time, and then after the product and the process have become a little bit more standardized, particularly the product has become more standardized, then it's all about reducing prices, and therefore the emphasis is more on process competition. And in the EU, we have this Community Innovation Survey, and I will just show you some selected results, which we calculated here. For instance, based on this theoretical model, it's very important to look at the ratio of green product innovations to process innovations. If you have a relatively high ratio, we would assume you are in an early stage, and maybe also you are a leader in this technology field. And if we look at this green sector ratio, then here you have the top 15 countries out of 31 which are covered. And interestingly, what do we see? Who is the leader? Well, it's the United Kingdom. If we look at the year 2012, and here we have a problem because the Community Innovation Survey covered this only for the year 2012, so they did not include this in the regular 2-year survey, which is a pity. But, okay, so you see a number of countries here. Germany is, I think, number 12. And I was thinking that a good benchmark to assess this green sector ratio in an additional way is to look at the ICT sector ratio, just for comparison, and also at all sectors. So, of course, the ICT sector is very dynamic. Okay, here you have the lower bottom countries, which I think is not so interesting. Here we have the green sector ICT and the ICT sector ratio. I will show you a different picture, which is easier to understand, I think. So we, of course, also understand that the ICT sector itself is strong in the EU, in the US, and in China. To some extent, it's also a green ICT sector. If you believe the industry people emphasizing in this GZ consortium of leading telecommunication firms from OECD countries, and there are also some countries from Asia now, well, then they want to make quick progress in the field of ICT, and by greening the ICT sector, of course, they think they can position their products in market and in the society in a better way. There are some rebound problems I do not want to look into. And of course, it's interesting simply to take a look, what is this link? What is the correlation between product innovation, process innovation ratio, and I did this here without the small countries, Luxembourg, Malta, Greece, and Latvia, because I think they would somehow bias the picture. Okay, that's slightly positive. One would have to look more deeply into this, also on the basis of econometric analysis. And then we were thinking about some of the policy aspects, and I think there's a wonderful paper which I really would emphasize. It's surprisingly from the IMF. The IMF in 2016 published a paper on China's policy options, and they covered a lot of instruments. They didn't look into recycling fees, and here I find the experience from Germany, from Europe to some extent, is that recycling fees should be imposed as a deposit or a refundable tax on certain products. If people have to pay a fee at the end of the product life cycle, they often will throw away the product, and this is an anti-recycling problem which we have. For instance, in Germany, they are collecting electronic products from households. But let's say if it is too small, if it is a toaster, they would say, we can't do anything with it. So please bring it to the next deposit, which is 10 miles away, and then you have to pay 20 euros. So I think not many people take this serious. So the system has its gaps, and the question is, why are our systems, in this case, not very intelligent? I think that you want to think more about the incentives for product innovations. For instance, if product innovations can be recycled, then I think this could be supported or encouraged by lower patent fees in the EU and in China. And there's nothing like this so far. So it's very important, if you think that the product, the infrastructure we are building, then, okay, once they are built, they are there for 10, 20 years, and you should encourage this recycling perspective very early on. I was very pleased to see that the EBRD's annual report this year had, for the first time, a big chapter on sustainability. And I think this is also a very important perspective, because it shows that the financial market perspective, the financial investor perspective, increasingly is interested in, let's say, more long-term, more sustainability-oriented investment. And here the EBRD and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank probably could come together in the future. I would very much encourage something like this. Whether we can have a Chinese innovation survey, we might consider maybe in the next project, but I would say this is one of the most important challenges. Maybe not just for China, it can be also for ASEAN countries. and maybe it would be just natural that the European Commission shares its experience and, well, tries to stimulate here some cooperation with Asia. Just a few remarks on the EIW Sustainability Index. I do not want to repeat what is in the paper and actually in the special issue of the journal International Economics and Economic Policy. But I just would like to emphasize what you see here is this global sustainability indicator ranking for 2000 and 2015. And the composite indicator which we have developed is one which is OECD compatible. It has 3 pillars. One is the share of renewable energy. The second is what we could call the genuine savings rate. So it's not the savings rate from the system of national accounts, but we take into account, according to this World Bank methodology, that there are additional expenditures which are, of course, representing saving for sustainable production, in this case, investment in human capital. And you have, on the other hand, with a negative sign, the depletion of natural resources and so on. And all the indicators we are using are then in a range between -1 and +1. And what is our contribution here is that the third pillar is the green competitiveness. So we are interested, what is the relative export position of a country in environmental friendly products as defined by the OECD. And here I just want to emphasize this enormous change in the RCA ranking, so in this green competitiveness ranking. So you see in the year 2000, you have Germany ranked number 2, China 129. Japan is the leader. And then in the year 2015, the number 1 position, according to our calculations, is Germany, and China is number 2. So I'm not saying that everything in China is just wonderful and Germany is just a great green economy. That's, of course, not the case, but it's enormous which change we can see in China and in some other countries. And just for comparison, if we just look at Asia, to some extent I was surprised that India is relatively weak. Of course, we can then argue, okay, if there would be some technology transfer, some green incentives, R&D cooperation and so on, then of course this big economy China could also become a very important player here. On the other hand, the very nature of RCA, of a relative comparative advantage indicator means, of course, we cannot all specialize in the same field. That this would be nonsense. The wisdom of Adam Smith was that we should specialize in different areas, and then we should trade, and then we have mutual benefits. One aspect which is, I think, very important here for China is that, and I find this also encouraging, that at least the growth rate of patent applications in, let's say, environmental friendly sectors or activities here in China. You see this is above the average for the total, which is the gray line. So the green lines, at least one of the green lines is above. I could not tell you anything about, what is the split between product innovation and process innovations. But I think this is very important to find out, because from the innovation literature, from the Schumpeterian perspective, if you want to understand this green dimension in an adequate way, you must have some good data, because also the policymakers otherwise would not really know what is the best way to promote green growth, sustainable growth. And here I think in many fields our project was, I might say, pioneering, and maybe at least in the spirit of Yonggeng and others, we should probably consider whether we cannot launch this, as I said, this kind of a joint survey where China would be included. And given the economic size of China, it would be just a very big mistake if we cannot make, let's say, some progress here. This is from this journal paper, which I would not like to repeat here. One of the interesting points, on the other hand, was when just kind of a scenario analysis. We can ask, how would the situation in the world change in terms of CO2 emission if the technical parameters of the EU were valid in China? Well, okay, then you get a very big reduction, of course, in China's emission, and it has an impact on the world global CO2 emissions. So here, on the other hand, you see this specific emission. On the other hand, as we all know, as China's growth is so strong, this is more than a rebound effect. Just at the end, a few words here on current research I'm conducting with two Chinese researchers at our chair and at the Institute, Mrs. Chong and Mrs. Yushkova. We are looking into Chinese regional sustainability dynamics, and in a certain way, we want to apply this EIW Vita Sustainability Indicator concept. We had to modify it because we cannot get the same data. For instance, in this case, what is the genuine savings rate at a regional level in China? So we look at environmental investment. So you have a picture here, a graph for the various regions. We look at water productivity. We look at waste disposed. We look at, of course, then the revealed technology advantage in environmental related patterns. So this is then the Schumpeterian dimension. And we look at sulfur dioxide emissions. And then if you apply equal weights and build this composite indicator, you get this picture. This graph maybe is then more interesting because here it's easier to understand. So you can see that there are big differences within China. And of course, in the future, we would then look from the empirical side, how can we explain the regional differentials in China? And then, of course, it would be nice to compare this with EU countries. We could do some benchmarking. We can look, okay, what are the 5 most important regions in terms of population, GDP weights, export weight, or FDI stocks? Because you have 31 regions, but the important thing is, are the big regions, are they, big in terms of an economic size, of an economic weight? Is there the progress, and how is the diffusion process in an economy which is so big as China, how is it organized? You can ask the same for the EU countries. So if then Germany is making, or the Netherlands making big progress in sustainability, is the diffusion policy efficient? And so I'm quite optimistic that we can learn a lot from comparative analysis. Certainly we can also learn from comparative analysis of the EU and ASEAN. So we can use the same theoretical approach, and I'm quite confident that this brings new perspectives for future research. We will complete our papers as we have them, see that we can contribute to this wonderful project, and hope that you find some of our ideas also interesting. Thanks.